There is a sentiment in the TTRPG community that horror is hard to do, and I understand why this is a thing. What they're really saying is horror, in maintaining immersion in a horror game is hard to do without it degenerating into generally horror comedy, which I don't think is really horror. I think it's just comedy with horror trappings. Now, this is because immersion is hard to maintain, at the best of times, even when you want to be immersed, I have a video on that. But horror explores things that makes us feel uncomfortable. And the natural inclination of a human being is to avoid situations that cause us this discomfort. If the thing that is making us feel uncomfortable is something we are actively maintaining with our own imagination, then you can imagine that dispelling it is as simple as just letting that go. Or, if it's an image that's strong enough to linger in our minds, then there's another stronger way to get rid of it, and that is crack a joke. It's almost involuntary. It's like reflexive. It's a defense mechanism. If you've ever cracked an out-of-character joke during an intense moment of roleplay to dispel the tension and discomfort, then guess what? You have just used a safety tool. Probably the most powerful safety tool that there is. And it's strong enough not to just take you away from that uncomfortable situation, but to bring everyone else to the table with you. Ultimately, I think there probably is just a simple incompatibility between players who want to and desire to immerse themselves in the feelings, the uncomfortable feelings that horror provides, and those that, for very natural reasons, want to avoid those feelings. Because our disinclination to feeling uncomfortable is natural, it's like gravity. Horror will just naturally make way for things that make us feel more comfortable, like comedy. So if you do want a real horror experience, then it doesn't happen by accident. You have to be very deliberate about it and upfront about it, and to play with players that are well prepared for it. Otherwise, there's no set of, techniques, horror techniques, which we will look at, right? There's no set of horror techniques that will, maintain the horror experience for you if your players just aren't on board with it. If you do want to walk the path of horror, I think, and this is a big claim, but I think not only is the horror genre a good fit for role-playing games, I think that role-playing games are one of the best ways to experience the horror genre. RPGs are like the premier format for horror, and that is what I'm here to talk about. So I care about horror. I think I have more thoughts on this matter than will fit into a single video, so consider this part one of a series. We will look at, why you would want to immerse yourself in the discomfort of horror, the advantages of RPGs for the horror genre, and I will give a little bit of advice on sources of inspiration for horror. In future, we will look at things like the psychological basis for horror, the techniques of horror, and the structures of horror, and some other things. So look forward to it. Until then, though, my name's Matt. Welcome to the Tomb of Lime. I love horror novels and movies and comic books and so on, but I think there are a couple of qualities inherent to those mediums that RPGs just do better. They have problems that RPGs solve, and that when done right, at least, RPGs can reach heights, or depths that these other mediums, even with all their unique strengths, just can't reach. So immersion is not unique to the role-playing game, but it is. It does it in a unique way. The way that we get immersed in RPGs, you can't really get with structured narratives because they impinge on agency. In an RPG, you can choose whatever you want to do. You can make decisions for your character, and you can inhabit and identify with your character that in a way that you don't seem to be able to do when you're just viewing someone else do the thing. Now, you've got agency in video games, and I do love horror video games, but they have a real problem with failure states, generally with character death. In a movie, if a character dies, you might have had some self-insertion right there, but basically, if it was you or you had been making the decisions or whatever, then you wouldn't have died. You would have done better, whatever. They died because they were dumb. But in a video game, if you die, you can just reload a save. Dying in a horror video game is awful for the horror experience. It destroys the tension that they so painstakingly build up throughout the game. But then again, without the real threat of the death, then there's no stakes, there's no tension. It's a conundrum. And to my knowledge, no one has really done a great job of solving this problem. Although, yes, there have been some very good attempts. In Aliens Infestation for the Nintendo DS, instead of lives per se, you know, each life is actually a new character with new name and portrait and quirks and dialogue trees and so on. Some RPGs do a similar thing, right? And when they die, they're gone forever, and the game doesn't stop, okay? The next character comes along. So that's pretty cool. It's still the case that you're controlling a team of guys rather than inhabiting a character, but it's all right. You know, I now recall in my younger years playing a game called Cannon Fodder on the probably DOS computer, and in that, you know, each of your guys gets a little name. If they die, you end up with like a little tombstone on a hillside in the loading. Oh man, I'm pretty sure I would get attached to those characters and like save scum my way so bad. My younger self could not deal with living with the consequences of my actions. In an RPG though, character death is great. It ups the tension for the surviving characters. If anything, like when a character dies in a horror RPG, it suddenly becomes real. When that first character dies, that's it. You know that the stakes are high. This combination of like character inhabitation and immersion and consequence for action puts like RPGs on like a nexus of qualities that just really lend themselves well to the horror genre, where the threat of death is real and you're not just watching it happen. You are not in a front row seat, you're in the driver's seat. In some sense, the idea that, you know, OSR games are D&D but survival horror is, I think, a big part of the appeal of that style of game, and it thrives on the tropes of horror to make that game work. But I think it goes deeper. I think it goes a lot deeper than that. Here we go. To become conscious of the shadow involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. This act is the essential condition for any kind of self-knowledge. You know, a lot of classical psychology has been superseded by more modern thought, for good reason. But I think there's still knowledge that these guys had, insights based on their experience that we can draw on if we stay somewhat skeptical about it. Because they had some kooky ideas, let's just say that. But one thing that sticks with people, a lot of people, is Jung's idea of the shadow. So the shadow is essentially the dark parts, unexposed parts of our psyche, including the unsavory things that we are capable of that most people would prefer to imagine does not exist. Intuitively, people think that if we suppress those parts of us, that they will kind of stay dormant and hidden and that they'll never manifest. But Jung thought the opposite. He thought that the more you expose and explore it, the more you understand it, the more you can control it. He thought that by ignoring the shadow, that it would kind of grow and fester until it manifests itself in surprising ways in our behavior and our thoughts. The advice is that we shouldn't pretend that that part of us doesn't exist, but that we should actively explore it so that we can understand it, so that we can better control it. I can't really say that Jung's psychological schema is true in any sense, right? But it is interesting to think about. And I think that horror is basically like this socially acceptable way to explore those kinds of ideas. Horror is a safe, imaginative way that we can explore the dark parts of our own psyche with a view to better self-knowledge. There's probably some caveats as to how to do this in a healthy way, right? But there are plenty of people, myself included, that have had affirming and positive yet challenging experience that, you know, when you plumb these depths and then you come back to the light, you have this like renewed appreciation for life, right? Not to oversell it. All right, secondly, I know that horror has its own set of tropes now. It seems to have like a baked-in sense of unpredictability to it. We watch to see who's going to survive, who's going to make it out. We don't know at the beginning. I mean, final girl trope notwithstanding, right? Horror has a strong connection to the unknown, and so there's a natural element of mystery to it, and that has to be unraveled. I mean, in psychological horror, we don't even know what's real half the time. Because of the dark nature of horror, there's no preponderance on happy endings necessarily. So at the beginning of a horror film, you don't know whether it's going to be a triumph or a tragedy. Well, guess what? You know, RPGs need to be unpredictable as well because they have player agency built in. So I think it's no mistake that horror and RPGs just seem to fit so well together. Thirdly, I think horror is intrinsically socially conscious because in order to be able to effectively scare people, to incite the horror feeling, you need to know what people are afraid of. And what people are afraid of changes over time. Horror then is like an insight into the psychological zeitgeist, that people who want to make effective horror need to understand people on a psychological level, which I think is an artistry in itself. To interact with culture and provide a social commentary and, analyze our anxieties as a society, horror is like a shadow exploration on a collective level. So for the sake of understanding how fear operates on us at that level, horror can be very insightful. You can look at the trends of horror to better understand human beings. Fourth, horror has a preponderance on showing us things that we've never seen before. So I think it's intrinsically always pushing the envelope creatively. The things they're showing us are often macabre, but I still appreciate the effort in creativity that goes into it. And five, there is a challenge element in, the puzzle of how to survive the horror situations. It's intellectually stimulating to think about that, and it's part of the fun is the attempt to survive. Just like mysteries challenge us with finding out the truth, horror challenges us with finding a way out. If you can overcome the fear response, then horror can be intellectually stimulating. Number 6, horror is good for social bonding. There seems to be something about going through a tense situation, that build-up, the build-up of emotions, the release of emotions, the release of that tension and coming back down with a group of people, that helps those people bond in a way that they had not before. It gives us a sense of camaraderie with the people that you survive with. So to sum up, in the words of Noel Carroll, the value of this emotional pretend play with fictions resides in the opportunities it provides us to make discoveries about our feelings, to accept them or to purge oneself of them, to vent repressed or socially unacceptable feelings, or to prepare oneself emotionally for the possibility of future situations by providing practice in responding to fictional crises. Practicing being brave. There's probably a bunch of other reasons that people are attracted to horror. I'm sure the psychologists have not had the final word on that yet. Now I think about it, there's theories of comedy that assumes that what we find funny is basically the misery of other people, because it lifts us up in our social standing or our perception of it. I suppose horror might have a similar thing going on, where we enjoy the suffering of others. There could be a sadistic side to the enjoyment of horror. But then again, in an RPG, it's your character, so maybe it's masochistic. Anyway, I want to give some actionable advice in this video. I want to tell you where a great place to go is for horror inspiration. And yes, it is one of the worst places imaginable. You have the best access of any human to yourself. And in every way that you are similar to someone else, you have access to them. Despite us all being unique little snowflakes, the resource you have on the human condition that you have the best access to is you, but only if you can be honest with yourself about yourself, which is surprisingly rare. Many of the most effective creatives in horror are not people who have studied the techniques of horror and studied human psychology in a general sense, but really they're just looking inward at their own fears and then inflicting them on others. This is great, really, for people who want to create in the horror genre who are more or less horror naive, because A, you don't need to know all the techniques of horror, and B, you haven't kind of desensitized yourself to all of this. You haven't convinced yourself that you are unafraid of everything. One of my big pieces of advice here is that rather than trying to come up with something new that scares people, the new fear unlocked, you take something that already people are afraid of, that you know from looking at yourself, and manifest it in a new way. Take something that scares you, you abstract it one step, because you can't use very, very specific fears of yours. Or maybe you can, but the coffin slides open and inside is the alligator from the Disney World Resort Lagoon. Yeah, I am not thrilled by submerged ambush predators. But yes, submerged ambush predator as a slightly abstracted concept version of that can be used to be inflicted on your players. Oh, you know what really gives me the willies when I think about it? There was a girl. She was playing hide and seek, and she decided to pop on top of her top-loading washing machine and tuck her knees up. She pulled her knees in and slid down into it, and as soon as her knees got below the lip of the washing machine, there's no way to push up without pulling the knees in. Oh my, they had to cut her out of the washing machine. I don't know how to turn that into horror yet, but hey, if you come up with an idea, let me know. Wait, what if there was a serial killer and he caught... Did you see this thing about these eco coffins? They had this cross section and it was a person basically tucked up like that in the coffin, and it was like this pod coffin, and they buried the coffin in the ground, and it was designed so that a tree would spring up out of your grave. The serial killer was... Oh, no. There's an urban legend. Oh, I hope it's an urban legend. There was this urban legend I saw about people that would put kittens in jars, and as the kitten grew, its skeleton would conform to the shape of the jar. What if the detectives, right? They find a femur, like a human femur, and it's got a right angle in it, and they take it to the coroner. This is not due to a break. The way, it had to have grown like this. The person that this belonged to was pressed up against something hard as they grew. Oh, and the serial killer down in his basement, he's got all these jars, and there's people in the jars. He's watering them, and he's feeding them, and he's planting. And the roots of the tree, they grow into they're still alive. Oh, and when he's ready, he plants them around the city. Oh, and the detectives find the basement, and they go in, and they crack the jars open, and the person's skeleton. Oh God, they can't help it. They're like, oh, kill me, or something like that. If you look at the horrors that get put on display, you might think, wow, that's a new thing I've never seen before. I'm afraid of this new thing. I'm afraid of this thing because it has this feature. But I think most of the time it's the other way around. I think most of the time is actually the people who designed the horror put that feature in it because you are already afraid of it. So yes, this is my quick tip, is to take something that you are already afraid of, abstract it one level, and then manifest it perhaps as a supernatural force of some kind. Turn something real that you fear into an unreal embodiment of that fear. Look, staring into the abyss of one's own soul may be a somewhat dangerous activity, but you guys are all well-adjusted individuals, right? I would think that YouTube has an algorithm specifically to push these videos to the right people, right? Actually, can I check that? Okay, YouTube Studio, Analytics, Audience. Okay, watch time, device time. What the? 90.4% neurodivergent? Holy shit! So I'd just like to say, I was gone for a little while there. The short explanation is that maybe my responsibilities as a husband and father were more important than my career as a YouTuber. I know, right? I try not to be dependent on the, social media dopamine, right? But for all the people that have liked, subscribed, commented nice things and so on, I appreciate it. All the people that sent me messages to check up on me and so on, thank you. And just so you know, YouTube can't actually tell if you're neurodivergent or not, but I can. And you're very welcome here. All right, I'm looking forward to making more videos on horror. I have a lot more things to say and think about and to explore here, so stick around if you want to hear more. And I will see you soon, don't worry. Anyway, my name is Matt. This was The Tomb of Lime. Thank you very much for listening. .4% neurodivergent? Holy shucked oyster!